Hello, my friends. Welcome back. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. New York never sleeps. That's what they tell you. What they don't tell you is that sometimes the city pretends to sleep, and if you're still awake when that happens, you notice things you were never meant to see. I moved to New York in late October, right when the air turns sharp and the sidewalks fill with dead leaves and cigarette butts. I got a studio apartment in Upper Manhattan, cheap by New York standards, suspiciously cheap if I'm being honest. The landlord avoided eye contact when he handed me the keys. He kept saying, "If anything feels off, it's probably the pipes." At the time, I laughed. I wouldn't laugh now. The first week was normal enough. Loud neighbors, sirens at all hours, the low, constant hum of traffic vibrating through the walls. The city felt alive, restless, comforting in its chaos. I worked late nights editing videos, so my sleep schedule was ruined from the start. Midnight felt like afternoon to me. That's when I first noticed it. At exactly 2:17 a.m., everything stopped, not gradually, instantly. The traffic noise vanished, the sirens cut out mid-wail. Even the distant subway rumble went silent, like someone had muted the world. I pulled my headphones off, thinking maybe my audio glitched. Nothing. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. Every car was frozen. A taxi halfway through an intersection, its headlights still on. A man mid-step in a crosswalk, 1 foot raised, his coat hanging unnaturally stiff. Steam rose from a street vent, but it didn't drift. It stayed perfectly still, like a photograph. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, everything snapped back. Sound flooded in all at once. Cars lurched forward. The man finished his step like nothing had happened. I stood there, heart racing. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress. Maybe I'd nodded off for a second. But the next night, it happened again. 2:17 a.m. Silence. Stillness. This time, I grabbed my phone and started recording. When I played the video back later, the timestamp jumped from 2:16:59 straight to 2:17:11. 11 seconds missing. The video itself was worse. The street looked normal, but I wasn't there. The reflection in my window was gone. Where I should have been standing, there was only darkness, like the glass reflected an empty room. That was the first moment I felt real fear. I started staying awake on purpose. I set alarms, drank too much coffee. I wanted to catch it happening. On the third night, when the city froze again, I didn't just watch. I went outside. The air felt wrong the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk. Thick, heavy, like breathing underwater. Sound didn't echo. My footsteps made no noise. I walked past people frozen in place. A woman laughing, mouth open too wide. A dog suspended mid-jump, leash pulled tight. Their eyes were open, tracking me, every single one of them. I backed away, my stomach turning. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. They came from behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned around. At the far end of the street, something was moving. It wore the shape of a person, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes that didn't quite hold their form. Its head tilted too far to one side, like it was curious about how humans balance their skulls. It was walking normally, through a frozen world. Panic hit me all at once. I ran, or tried to. My legs felt heavy, like the air itself resisted me. The thing didn't chase, it followed, always the same distance away, never rushing, never stopping. I ducked into my building and slammed my apartment door shut. The moment the clock hit 2:17:11, sound crashed back into existence. I collapsed on the floor, shaking. The next morning, I checked the news. Nothing. No reports of blackouts, no mention of time gaps, just another normal New York day. Except my neighbor across the hall was gone. The door was open. Inside, the apartment was empty. No furniture, no dust outlines, no signs anyone had ever lived there. Like the space had been erased. I asked the landlord. He stared at me for a long time before saying, "That unit's been vacant for years." I knew that was a lie. Things escalated quickly after that. The pauses started happening earlier, 2:14, 2:12, and they lasted longer. Sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes minutes. The thing outside came closer each night, and it wasn't alone anymore. I began seeing others like it, standing at street corners during the frozen moments, facing inward, as if guarding something. They never moved unless time stopped. I stopped sleeping entirely. One night, at 2:09 a.m., my apartment door began to open on its own during the pause, slowly, quietly. I tried to scream. No sound came out. A figure stepped inside. This one looked more familiar. It had my face, not perfectly. The eyes were too dark, the smile stretched just a little too wide, but it was me, or something pretending very hard to be. It leaned close and whispered, though there was still no sound. The words appeared directly in my head. "You noticed. That was the mistake." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. It reached out and pressed 2 fingers against my chest. I felt cold spread through me, deep and sharp. "New York is layered," it said. "Most people only live in one version. Sometimes the layers slip." It tilted its head, studying me like an object. "You slipped through." When time restarted, I woke up on my bed. Days passed, or maybe weeks. I'm not sure anymore. The pauses became permanent. The city no longer comes back. I walk through silent streets now, surrounded by frozen people who never blink. The sky above New York is stuck in a gray half-dawn, like the sun forgot how to rise. The figures watch me constantly. Sometimes I catch my reflection in windows, and it moves when I don't. I think I understand now. New York didn't break. I did. Or maybe I'm the replacement. Because last night, at 2:17 a.m., time moved again, just for a moment. I saw people walking, living, laughing, and I was the one standing still. If you're reading this, if you're in New York, if the city ever goes quiet all at once, don't go outside. And whatever you do, don't notice too much. Something went wrong, and it's learning how to fix itself. New York has a smell. People argue about it. Garbage, metal, rain, old food. But that's not what I mean. I mean the other smell. The one you only notice late at night when the street's empty and the air feels heavier than it should. It smells like something old being disturbed, like the city is breathing through cracked teeth. I moved to New York because I thought disappearing into a crowd would make me feel less alone. I was wrong. I worked overnight security for a midtown office building, the kind with mirrored windows and a lobby that echoes no matter how softly you walk. Graveyard shift paid better, and I liked the quiet. The city outside never really slept, but inside the building, time felt thick and slow. The first thing that went wrong happened on a Tuesday at 3:03 a.m. I remember the time because the digital clock on the security desk flickered when it happened. I was watching the camera feeds, 24 little squares showing empty hallways, locked offices, stairwells no one ever used. Outside, cameras showed Fifth Avenue, traffic flowing like a vein that never closed. Then, the screens glitched. Not static, not distortion. They all showed the same image, the lobby, but I was already there. On every screen, I could see myself sitting at the desk, staring up at the monitors. Same posture, same uniform, same tired slouch. The version of me on the screens slowly lifted his head and smiled. The screen snapped back to normal instantly. My heart hammered so hard, I thought I might black out. I checked the timestamp on the footage history. There was a gap, 8 minutes missing. I told myself it was a software issue, a stress hallucination. I didn't tell my supervisor. In New York, you learn quickly that admitting something feels wrong makes you the problem. After that night, the city felt thinner, like a backdrop stretched too tight. I started noticing streets that didn't match my memory. A bodega on 46th that wasn't there the night before. subway entrances that led somewhere unfamiliar, reflections in windows that lagged half a second behind my movements. Then there were the people. Most New Yorkers avoid eye contact like it's a contagious disease, but suddenly, strangers were staring at me. Not aggressively, not curiously, intently, as if they were waiting for me to do something. One night after work, I took a different route home. The streets were unusually quiet, even for 4 a.m. I passed a man standing under a streetlight, completely still. I walked past him. He whispered my name. I stopped. I hadn't told anyone in the city my name yet. When I turned around, the streetlight flickered, and the man was gone. The subway was next. I was on the downtown A train, alone in the car, except for a woman sitting at the far end. The train slowed between stations, then stopped completely. The light stayed on, but the hum of electricity faded into silence. The woman stood up. She walked toward me with jerky, uneven steps like she was learning how legs worked for the first time. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Something went wrong," she said, her voice layered, like several people speaking slightly out of sync. Then the lights went out. When they came back on, she was gone. So was the train operator. The doors opened to a station I didn't recognize. No signs, no maps, just a long concrete platform stretching into darkness. The walls were covered in grime and old posters, except the posters weren't advertisements. They were missing person flyers, thousands of them. Every face stared back at me. Some were old, some were recent. One was mine. I ran. I don't remember how I got home that night. I don't remember unlocking my door. I only remember sitting on my bed, shaking, while the city outside my window made sounds that didn't feel natural, too rhythmic, too intentional. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow knocks on my door. I didn't move. Another 3. Then a voice. Mine. "I know you're in there," it said calmly. "We need to talk." I stayed silent. The voice sighed. "You weren't supposed to notice. None of you ever notice." The door handle rattled once, gently, like a test. Then everything went quiet. I called in sick the next night and stayed home. I covered my windows, turned off all the lights, but the silence didn't leave. It pressed against the walls, heavy and expectant. At 3:03 a.m., my apartment lights flickered. The smell returned, stronger now. The walls began to stretch, not crack, not break. Stretch like they were made of something soft. The shadows in the corners deepened, pulling away from their sources. My reflection in the bathroom mirror blinked when I didn't. "You're standing in the wrong version," my reflection said. I smashed the mirror. The city outside my window was wrong. Buildings leaned inward, subtly, like they were listening. The street below was empty, except for people standing motionless at intersections, all facing my building, waiting. I realized then what had happened. New York wasn't one place, it was layered. Versions stacked on top of each other, constantly correcting, constantly replacing mistakes. People slipped through sometimes, disappeared into the cracks between realities, and I had seen something I wasn't meant to. The city noticed me noticing. At dawn, or something pretending to be dawn, I left my apartment. The street was silent. The people were gone. The air felt thin, buzzing faintly like power lines without wires. I walked north, then east, then nowhere that made sense. Eventually, I found myself back at my office building. The doors were open. Inside, the lobby was spotless, too clean. The security desk sat empty. The monitors were on. All of them showed New York. Different versions, different outcomes, burned, flooded, abandoned, twisted. One screen showed a normal city, another showed an empty one. Another showed something else wearing the city's shape. A hand rested on my shoulder. "You can't go back," my double said softly. He stood beside me, solid and calm, like he belonged here. "But you can help us stabilize things." I shook my head. "I just want to leave." He smiled sadly. "There's no outside anymore, not for you." The screens flickered. I felt myself fading, becoming less real, less solid. The city hummed around me, adjusting, correcting. "You'll be useful," he continued. "You'll stand where things broke. You'll make sure others don't notice." The last thing I remember is sitting at the desk, watching the cameras, seeing someone new arrive in the lobby, wide-eyed, confused, staring up at the screens. At 3:03 a.m., the footage glitches, and I smile. The city didn't collapse. There was no explosion, no blackout, no screaming headlines. That's what still bothers me. If something catastrophic had happened, people would remember. They'd talk about it. There would be footage, memorials, flowers wired to fences. But whatever went wrong in New York didn't announce itself. It edited itself. I noticed because my name disappeared first. I worked, at the Municipal Archives on Chambers Street, basement level, climate-controlled rooms full of paper records nobody ever asks for, property transfers from the 1800s, birth certificates written in ink so faded it looks like spider webs, death records stacked so densely they smell faintly sweet, like old wood. I cataloged things. That was my job, assigning numbers, making sure people stayed officially real. On a Monday morning in November, I tried to log into the system and my employee profile was gone. I assumed it was an IT error. Those happened all the time. I went to HR. The woman behind the desk scrolled through her screen, frowned, and asked me who I was visiting. "I work here," I said. She smiled politely, the smile people give when they think you're confused or unstable. "There's no record of you ever being employed by the city." I laughed, waiting for her to join in. She didn't. I showed her my ID badge. She turned it over, slowly. "This badge number belongs to someone who retired 12 years ago," she said. My stomach tightened. I left before security could be called. Outside, New York moved the way it always does. Crowded, impatient, loud, yellow taxis, sirens, people yelling into phones. The city didn't feel wrong. I did. I checked my wallet. My driver's license was there, my credit cards, my name printed clearly. But when I went home and searched myself online, the results were thin. No social media profiles, no articles, no tagged photos. Just a single property record listing me as a tenant in my current apartment. Even that document looked wrong, like it had been scanned, edited, and rescanned too many times. I tried calling my sister. The number rang, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. "Wrong number," the woman said, irritated. I texted her. "Who is this?" Came back. I sat on my couch until nightfall, watching the city through my window, feeling like I'd stepped half an inch out of alignment with reality. That's when the noise stopped. Not suddenly, carefully. The traffic faded first, then the sirens, then the distant subway rumbled beneath the street, like someone slowly lowering a volume slider. At 11:41 p.m., the city was silent. I looked outside. People were still there, frozen mid-motion. A man leaned forward, foot lifted to step off the curb. A woman's hair hung in the air behind her, caught in a wind that no longer existed. A bus sat diagonally across an intersection, its headlights casting pale cones of unmoving light. Then someone blinked. Not one of the frozen people. Someone else. Standing across the street directly below my window. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that looked too heavy for his body, like it was hanging from him rather than being worn. His face was blurred, not obscured, just unfinished, like a memory you can't quite recall. He looked straight up at me and waved. I backed away from the window. When the sound returned, it came back wrong, too loud, too fast. The city lurched forward like it had been shoved. The man across the street was gone. I didn't sleep. Over the next few days, my existence continued to thin. My bank account locked itself, pending verification. My landlord knocked on my door and asked why I was squatting in an empty apartment. My name no longer appeared on the mailbox downstairs. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the certainty growing inside me that this was intentional. On Thursday, I went back to the archives. I wasn't stopped at the door. No one noticed me at all. People walked through me like I was just slightly out of phase. Cold spread through my chest each time it happened, like static crawling under my skin. In the basement, the lights flickered. I found my section, row C, shelf 14. There was a new box, no label, no catalog number, just my name, handwritten in black ink. Inside were documents, my birth certificate, school records, medical files, photos I didn't remember being taken, a death certificate dated 3 days in the future, cause of death, administrative correction. I heard footsteps behind me. "You found it earlier than expected," a voice said. I turned. The man from the street stood at the end of the aisle. Up close, his face was worse, features shifting subtly, struggling to stay consistent. "What is this?" I demanded. "A rollback," he replied calmly. "You weren't supposed to persist." My throat went dry. Persist from what? He gestured to the shelves. "New York accumulates errors," he said. "People who shouldn't exist. Timelines that bend too far. Data that contradicts itself." "You're saying I'm an error?" He considered this. "You're a leftover." The lights dimmed. "Most people don't notice when they're corrected," he continued. "Their memories smooth over. Their absence is absorbed." I shook my head. "No, I've lived here my whole life." "That's the problem," he said softly. "You lived in 2 versions at once." The shelves around us began to shift, boxes sliding, labels changing, names appearing, disappearing. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he said. "Years ago, a glitch in the transit system, a train that arrived where it shouldn't have." My memory stirred. A platform with no signs, a train car with no driver, a voice on the intercom repeating the same sentence in a loop. I remembered stepping off. "I came back," I whispered. He smiled, not unkindly. "You didn't." The building groaned like an animal adjusting its weight. "Your correction is already underway," he said, "but you're difficult." I ran. The stairs blurred beneath my feet. The exit door led not to the street but to another hallway, longer, darker, lined with doors that all bore my name. Behind me, footsteps followed, not fast, patient. I burst through one door and stumbled onto a street I didn't recognize. New York, but wrong. Buildings were taller, closer, pressing in. Windows reflected nothing. The sky was a dull, unmoving gray. People stood along the sidewalks, motionless, all facing inward, watching. "You're exhausting the system," the man said, suddenly beside me. "You're causing overlap." He placed a hand on my shoulder. The city shifted. I saw flashes, other versions of streets, other outcomes, fires, floods, emptiness, cities abandoned mid-sentence. "You can stop this," he said. "All you have to do is let go." I thought of my sister, my job, my life. "I don't want to disappear," I said. "You already have," he replied gently. The pressure in my chest intensified. My memories began to unravel, faces losing names, places losing meaning. "I'll stay," I said suddenly. "Here, in this version." His expression changed. "That's not an option." I looked around at the frozen people. "What if I replace you?" I asked. Silence. The city trembled. For the first time, he looked uncertain. When the noise returned, it was different, louder, angrier. "I'm writing this from the archives basement. I sit at the desk now. I catalog names that no longer belong to anyone. When someone notices too much, when they slip, I make sure their records are complete." Correct. Outside, New York hums on, unaware. If your name ever starts to fade, if the city ever goes quiet, don't look for answers, because something went wrong, and the city doesn't like to be reminded. I used to think New York was loud. Now I know it was just drowning something out. I've lived here long enough to know the city has patterns. Sirens rise and fall like breathing. Subway platforms hum even when trains aren't coming. Buildings creak in the wind like old bones. There's comfort in it, a rhythm that convinces you the city is alive and somehow watching over you. The night that went wrong, the rhythm broke. I was walking home from a late shift near Canal Street, cutting through streets I'd walked 100 times before. It was just after midnight, the hour when New York thins out, but never fully empties. The shops were closed, gates down, neon signs buzzing weakly. The air smelled like wet concrete and trash bags. Then I realized something was missing. Footsteps. Not mine, everyone else's. I stopped walking. The city didn't answer. No cars, no voices, no distant music bleeding from an apartment window. Even the wind was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, listening to my own breathing echo too loudly. It felt like I'd stepped into a soundproof room built in the shape of Manhattan. That's when the streetlights dimmed. Not all at once, one by one, down the block, like something blinking awake. I pulled my phone out. No signal, no bars. The time read 12:44 a.m. It stayed that way. I told myself this was a blackout. A weird one, sure, but New York has survived worse. I kept walking, faster now, heading toward the subway entrance at the end of the street. The entrance was gone. Not closed, not blocked. Gone. In its place was bare concrete, smooth and seamless, like the subway had never existed there at all. My chest tightened. I turned around. The street behind me was longer than it should have been. Much longer. Buildings stretched on and on, repeating the same storefronts, the same graffiti tag, the same flickering sign advertising a pizza place that no longer existed. I started to run. My footsteps finally made sound again, but they didn't echo. They were swallowed immediately, like the city didn't want proof I was there. That's when I saw the first person. A man stood in the middle of the sidewalk, facing away from me. He wore a dark coat, hands in his pockets, posture stiff. I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly knocked me over. "Hey," I called. He didn't react. I moved closer. "Are you okay?" The smell hit me first. Metallic, old, like rainwater left too long in a rusted pipe. When the man turned around, I understood why the city had gone quiet. His face was wrong, not mutilated, not bloody, incomplete, like someone had erased the details. No eyebrows, no lashes, no texture to the skin. His eyes were flat and dark, reflecting nothing. His mouth opened slowly, and kept opening. The jaw unhinged with a soft, wet sound, stretching far past what bone should allow. Something inside him shifted, rearranging, like gears slipping. "Return," it said. The voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from the street itself. I screamed and bolted past him. The city changed as I ran. Windows darkened, street signs twisted, letters sliding into unfamiliar arrangements. Streets angled subtly downward, funneling me deeper, away from anything familiar. I realized then that New York wasn't empty. It was resetting. I ducked into a building I recognized, an old apartment complex with a busted intercom. The door opened too easily. Inside, the lobby lights flickered, casting long shadows that didn't match the objects creating them. The smell followed me in. I climbed the stairs, skipping steps until my lungs burned. On the third floor, I burst into a hallway lined with apartment doors. All of them were open. Inside each apartment, the same thing waited. Furniture arranged neatly, lights on, televisions playing static, and people standing perfectly still in the center of each room, not frozen, waiting. Their eyes followed me as I backed away. One of them spoke. "You're not aligned." Another voice from a different apartment answered. He noticed early. A third voice whispered from behind me. "Early ones are harder to fix." I turned. The hallway had shortened. The stairs were gone. The walls pulsed faintly, like something breathing beneath the paint. That's when I understood. New York wasn't correcting a power failure, it was correcting me. I didn't belong in this version of the city anymore. Somehow, I still don't know how, I'd stepped out of place. Maybe I missed a train that night. Maybe I took the wrong turn. Maybe the city simply miscounted. But I was in error. The lights went out. In the darkness, the city spoke without voices. You were recorded incorrectly. Hands touched me, not grabbing, not restraining, measuring. Fingers pressed into my arms, my spine, my skull, like technicians inspecting faulty equipment. Images flooded my mind. Versions of New York where I never existed. Versions where I died years ago. Versions where I never moved here at all. You don't match any stable outcome, something said, gently disappointed. I fought. I don't know why, instinct probably, but I shoved, kicked, screamed. I felt myself tear through something soft and elastic, like ripping through fabric. Suddenly, I was outside again. The street was different now, older. The buildings were unfamiliar, architectural styles blending together wrong. Cars sat abandoned, rusted, half sunk into cracked asphalt. The sky was a dull, unmoving gray, and the city was full of people, thousands of them. They wandered aimlessly, bumping into one another, murmuring half-finished sentences. Their faces flickered, changing slightly every few seconds, like poorly rendered characters in a simulation. A woman grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate. "You too?" she whispered. "You felt it break?" I nodded. She started to cry. "They said we'd be put back," she sobbed. "They said it was temporary." Above us, something vast shifted. I felt it more than saw it. A pressure, like a hand hovering over the city, deciding where to press next. A voice boomed, not loud, but absolute. Reconciliation in progress. The ground trembled. Buildings collapsed inward, folding like paper. Streets reconfigured, snapping into new layouts. People screamed as they were pulled apart, merged, erased. The woman holding my arm began to blur. "No, no, no," she begged, her face losing definition. I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until the air burned my lungs raw. I ducked into a subway tunnel, not an entrance, just a hole torn open in the street. Inside, the darkness felt safer. Wrong, but safer. I'm still here now, somewhere beneath New York. The trains don't run down here, but I hear them sometimes, passing overhead, carrying people who never noticed anything went wrong. Every so often, the city shudders. Each time, fewer of us remain. I don't know how long before it finishes correcting itself, before it notices I'm still here. If you're reading this from New York and something feels slightly off, a street longer than it should be, a familiar place gone without explanation, don't try to understand it. Don't stop walking. Don't look too closely, because the city hates errors, and it always fixes them. I realized something was wrong with New York when the maps stopped agreeing with each other. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean actual maps. Google Maps, subway maps, old paper tourist maps stolen from hotel lobbies. They all started contradicting one another in small, specific ways. A street that curved instead of running straight. A park entrance that didn't exist. A subway tunnel that connected to a station I had never heard of. At first, I assumed it was a data issue. New York changes constantly. Buildings rise, businesses die, streets get rerouted. But this was different. This felt intentional. Like the city was being redrawn by someone who only half remembered how it was supposed to look. I noticed it because I deliver packages at night. Overnight courier work is simple. Pick up, drop off, don't ask questions. Offices, private apartments, places people don't want to be seen visiting during the day. I like it because the city is quieter then, more honest. New York at 3 a.m. doesn't pretend to be friendly. One night, I was sent to deliver a package to an address in Lower Manhattan. The address existed. I checked it 3 times, but the street didn't. Where the building should have been, there was a narrow alley I'd never seen before. Too narrow to be legal, squeezed between 2 brick buildings that leaned inward like they were tired of standing. There was no sign, no streetlight, just darkness and the faint smell of damp concrete. My phone buzzed. Delivery status, pending. Please proceed. I stepped into the alley. The city noise died instantly like a door shutting behind me. No traffic, no voices. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, too soft, like the ground was absorbing the sound. Halfway down the alley, I saw a door. It was metal, unmarked, painted the same gray as the surrounding walls. No handle, no keypad, just a rectangular indentation where something might have been removed. I checked the package, no return address, no label except a handwritten note taped to the top. "You're late." The door opened on its own. Inside was a stairwell going down. I didn't go in. I marked the delivery as unable to access and turned around. The alley was gone. Behind me was a brick wall, solid, old, unmoving. I spun in place, panic rising, my breath echoing too loudly in the tight space. The door was still open. I went down the stairs. The stairwell led to a room that looked like a subway station, but wrong. Too clean, too symmetrical. The tiles were white, uncracked, reflecting the overhead lights perfectly. No trash, no graffiti, no ads. At the center of the room was a long table. On it were maps, hundreds of them. Some were ancient, hand-drawn, yellowed with age. Others were modern, laminated digital printouts. They all showed New York, but every single one was slightly different. Streets missing, buildings misplaced, rivers bending where they shouldn't. And some maps had sections scratched out violently, like someone had tried to erase a mistake by force. A man sat at the far end of the table. He wore a city maintenance uniform, orange vest, reflective stripes, but his face was blurred, not out of focus, but unfinished, like a face that hadn't fully rendered yet. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said calmly. I dropped the package. "What is this place?" I asked. He sighed. "A correction site." The lights flickered. He gestured to the maps. "New York isn't stable. It never has been. Too many people, too much history layered on top of itself. Mistakes accumulate." "Mistakes like what?" He looked at me then. "Like you." I ran. I don't remember leaving the room or climbing the stairs. I only remembered bursting out onto a street that almost made sense. Familiar buildings were there, but some were mirrored, some were too tall. Some leaned at impossible angles, like they'd been copied incorrectly. People walked past me, but none of them blinked, not once. I got home somehow. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and didn't sleep. At dawn, I checked my phone. No record of the delivery, no address, no missing time. I tried to convince myself it was stress, hallucination, a dream layered over exhaustion. But the maps kept changing. My usual routes began taking longer. Streets doubled back on themselves. Subway trains skipped stations that clearly existed. Announcements named stops I'd never heard of. One night, I watched a building across the street from my apartment move. Not collapse, not shift suddenly. It slid, slowly, subtly, like someone adjusting a piece on a game board. When it stopped, the fire escape no longer lined up with the windows. The building looked embarrassed, like it knew it was wrong. I started seeing the maintenance workers everywhere. Orange vests, blank faces, standing at corners, staring at nothing. Sometimes holding tools that didn't look like tools. Long, thin objects that hummed faintly, bending the air around them. Every time I tried to photograph them, my phone glitched. The images came out as maps. Then the notes started appearing in my apartment, on the mirror, misplaced, on my door, error confirmed, on my bed written into the dust, "Do not move." At night I heard footsteps outside my apartment, measured, coordinated. Sometimes the sound of paper sliding, like maps being unfolded. I stopped leaving. On the seventh night, the wall in my living room peeled back like wet wallpaper, revealing the same stairwell from the alley. The man from the table stood there. "You're destabilizing your surroundings," he said gently. "The longer you stay uncorrected, the worse it gets." "What does that mean?" I asked. He stepped aside, letting me see past him. Beyond the stairwell was a vast space, bigger than any underground structure should be. Rows and rows of New York models stretched into darkness, physical models, miniature buildings, streets, bridges. Some were pristine, others were broken, burned, flooded, twisted into unrecognizable shapes. You're from a version that no longer aligns, he continued, a rounding error, a leftover. You're saying I don't belong here. You belong, he said, just not here. He handed me a map. It showed New York, but without me. My apartment building wasn't there. My street ended abruptly. Even the routes I used nightly simply stopped. What happens if I don't go? I asked. The lights dimmed. Then the city compensates. The ground shook slightly, like distant thunder. People disappear. Blocks get rewritten. Eventually something bigger breaks. I thought about the alley, the station, the blinkingless people. How do I go back? I asked. He smiled, not kindly. There is no back, only removal. The stairwell began to close. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. Streets folded, neighborhoods repeated. I saw the same bodega 3 times in different boroughs. I crossed a bridge that shouldn't exist, over water that reflected the wrong sky. The city was unraveling around me. Buildings flickered between versions. Street signs changed languages mid-sentence. People froze in place, their outlines blurring, like sketches being erased. I made it to Central Park, or something pretending to be it. The trees were wrong, too symmetrical, repeating patterns like copied textures. The paths formed perfect grids instead of curves. At the center of the park was a hole, not a crater, an absence, a perfectly shaped void in the ground, edges too clean, too intentional. Around it stood the maintenance workers, waiting. I understood then. New York wasn't failing, it was cleaning. I stepped back. The ground shifted beneath me, pulling inward. The air buzzed with that low humming sound. I felt myself losing weight, substance, like a bad memory fading. As I fell, I saw the city above me stabilize. Buildings snapped into place, streets realigned, people blinked again. The last thing I saw was a maintenance worker unfolding a new map. This one was clean. Correct. Without me. Thanks for watching, my friends. If you want more true horror, like, comment, and subscribe.